Hi, I'm Allison Miller, the founder and CEO of Happy Camper Live, and we are here at the Raising a Happy Camper podcast. And I'm here with my friend Steph West. And Steph, I'm super excited to have you here today. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here too.
Yeah. So, Steph, would you like to just introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. I run Starfish Social Club, which is social support for neurodivergent kiddos and teens. So kids who are autistic, have ADHD, learning disabilities, whatever the case may be. During the school year, I run social skills groups and I also provide one-on-one support. And in the summer, we have summer camp. So that's my program. It's all about helping neurodivergent kiddos be more socially successful.
That's great. So tell me, I was curious, Starfish Social Club. So tell me where the name came from.
Yeah, there's a kind of a well-known story called the Starfish story.
Yeah.
And it's basically there's a beach and there's a bunch of starfish that have washed up on the shore. And there's a girl running along the beach and throwing them back into the ocean. And a man comes along and he watches what she's doing and he says, "Why are you wasting your time? You can't save all of them." And she runs up to the next one and throws it back in the ocean and says, "I just saved that one." So I'm not saving anybody. I don't want to pretend that I'm saving anybody, but it's just a concept that I can help kids one at a time. I can't help all the kids that are out there, but I can help kids one at a time. And for the kids that I can support, it can be a significant difference in their future. So that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Starfish Social Club.
I'm familiar with that story, and that is a big thing we talk about at a lot of different camps. So I appreciate that. And the thing is, each kid is an individual, and we, really do have to meet their needs. And in the school, traditional academic setting, individuality isn't really celebrated as it is, in camp, right? So having this direct one-on-one or group settings that you put the kids in really, it's just a wonderful benefit for a child. So I totally get that. So I was wondering today, I would just know that you have a lot of I'll call them tips, for parents, that are, having challenges, working with their kids. And you actually have so many great resources on your website. I just want everybody to know that. And it was really, there's a quiz on there. And what I found interesting about the quiz was not only did the questions relate to the kids, but it was like, how are you as a parent relating to your child? And how are you supporting that child? And so it really put that framework there, which wasn't just like, well, tell me which, who is my child? Where do they kind of fit in? And you have an interesting way of doing that. But, as a parent, what are your challenges that you're facing? So I would love to hear some tips for parents of how they can support their kids in order to have them be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the quiz that you're talking about, it's honestly something I just made up. But I've run Starfish Social Club. I'm on my 8th year now. And before that, I've always been in the special education world. So I just started to realize that there are different types of kiddos when it comes to autism, ADHD. And so that's what the quiz is about, is how does your kiddo show up in the world? Right. And one type is the kids who they have a pretty positive attitude. Other people really like being around them. They're typically friendly, polite. But despite all that, they don't have actual friends. Right. They're not getting invited places. They don't have anybody's phone number, even though everybody likes them and enjoys being around them. And
Right.
so that's kind of a confusing one is, why would that be the case? And for those kids, it's because they don't have actual social awareness and things like they might not know how to join in on a conversation. They might not know how to have a reciprocal conversation. And so even though people really like being around them, they're not engaging in the social aspect of being around other kids. And so for kids like that, the most successful strategies for them are explicit instruction.
Oh,
They need someone really helping them and supporting them in gaining those explicit skills that they just don't have. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't really think about kids like that as needing social skills support because they're so friendly and they get along with everybody. But if you watch them in a group of peers, they're not actually engaging.
interesting.
They're usually just hanging out.
Interesting. So what would be an example of an instruction that you would give to a child?
I have a whole module in my program all about conversation skills. And so things like how to ask another person questions, how to initiate a conversation based on what you know about somebody, how to keep a conversation going,
Right.
how to show that we're interested in somebody else, because most of those kids are very interested in other people. They just don't know how to show that.
Right.
Right. And so those are all the things that I teach in that specific module is just how to converse with other people, because a lot of times the kids that other people like and get along with, they can get by just fine not engaging in conversations. But this is why they don't have actual authentic relationships, is because they're not engaging with other people.
Right.
So for those kiddos, it really is just the instruction in the things that they just don't recognize or understand at that time.
Yeah,
There's
I was just going to ask, do you think that these days, as I like to say, in our technology, world where kids just are conversing through social media, do you feel like some of these skills just apply to all kids? I mean, I guess it's easier for some to just naturally, I guess is what you're saying. Like maybe there's just a more natural way that people do that. But I wonder if it really is natural anymore, I'm just curious what
yeah,
you think.
I think with technology, with text messaging, social media, all these things, I do think the concept of a conversation has definitely changed. I think that's very true that a lot of kids don't recognize or know how to engage in an authentic, genuine conversation. And even, things on technology tend to be shorthand, abbreviations and things like that. Whereas in a conversation, that's not how we talk. We don't LOL, for example, in an actual conversation.
Right.
So I do think that, especially for kids who already may not understand conversation skills, that technology, I think, can really make it even more challenging for them.
Right.
But I think we have kids now who've been raised with technology, those of us, we weren't.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And so you have kids who just have missed that kind of part of growing up and maturing, is how to have conversations with other
Yeah.
people. I also think because we always have our phones, people in general are much less likely to engage in random conversations with people out in the world.
Right.
Whereas before, I think I actually do that a lot. I personally engage in random conversations a lot because I really like just connecting to random people without there having to be any kind of outcome, right? But I think most people, anytime there's downtime, people pick up their phones,
Right.
right? And
I leave
so,
my phone home a lot, like if I can, if
uh-huh.
now that my son is in college and my daughter's married, it's like, and my parents are no longer with me, I'm just like, my husband has his phone. I'm like, all right, emergency, like they got him. So I
Yeah.
really do. When I go out for dinner or, anytime I can leave my phone home, I actually do. I just feel like it's good practice. And also because at camp, you get used to not having that. But I was thinking too that, you know, that these tips and instructions of like teaching the kids, giving them direct instructions, I really do think it applies. And, that parents could get a lot of benefit out of it, even if they do not have a neurodivergent kid. So that's why I wanted to sort of broaden the conversation and also mention that like camp provides this incredible opportunity for kids to be able to practice, because now you're taking them out of the academic setting and all it is social,
Yes. And that for some kids, that can be really awkward and uncomfortable. If you have some kids, and another one of the types of kids in my program is kids who are socially anxious. And this is so often misunderstood and overlooked.
Right.
So I find that social anxiety doesn't always look like what people think it would look like. Sometimes it's kids who are really comfortable in an academic setting like school, and so then you transition to a summer camp type program,
Right.
and they feel very out of place.
Right.
They maybe don't want to go. Maybe they start coming up with reasons or excuses why they can't go or shouldn't go. They would much rather just be at home, doing whatever it is that they would prefer to do. So that's another type of kiddo, is kids who are socially anxious. This can also look like kids who over apologize. That's a form of social anxiety. Kids who just really don't feel comfortable being in groups and talking to other kids. Social anxiety at its core is a fear of how other people will respond to you. So it's being worried that you're going to say something stupid, being worried that other people are going to think that you're weird. This is social anxiety, and it's so much more prevalent than most people realize, even outside of the neurodivergent world. Even it's very prevalent, and I do think the last few years has made that more prevalent as well,
Right.
because we became isolated, and so it was like pulling everything back, and then now we're going back out into the world again. I think for some people who maybe didn't feel socially anxious before, I think they do now. And
Yeah.
so I think social anxiety is so much more prevalent than people realize, and it looks different than people expect it to.
Yeah, that was a good description, because I do see a lot of that in the camp world. It's a lot of the apologies and, feeling like, oh, I never say the right thing. And,
Yeah.
everybody thinks I'm weird. Like a lot of the things you said really resonate with me about from what I've heard from different campers. So I think that's a really good point. And, again, we were talking about phones, but one of the other things I see at camp, a lot of camps are technology free. And what I think another challenge is that the games, sort of, especially I don't want to stereotype the boys and the girls, but like the violent sort of like aggressiveness of the games, and the fact that they think they're socializing through the games because they're playing with other people, also has caused like a lot of issues, so that they don't know how to interact unless they're like in that kind of aggressive like situation, which I've seen more and more of the past few years. I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
That's interesting. I think the students that are in my program, I think have much less interactions with people in general. And so even from a lot of my students are gamers, but not social gamers, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But I do think it definitely even, it's interesting. I was thinking a few years ago about TV. And even if you think about the shows that are geared towards adolescents, and even if you think back to when you were growing up and the types of shows that you watched as an adolescent, there's so much sarcasm and making fun of other people. I mean, there's a character in every show that's the weird one, right? And so much of the show is around poking fun at this character. And there's things that are said and done in TV shows that are funny that in real life are not funny.
Right.
And so and even one of my favorite examples is oh, I just forgot the name of it now. The one with Sheldon Cooper, where they're scientists and
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So he in that show, his quirkiness is the main point of the show, right? I mean, the show wouldn't be the same without his quirkiness. But in the show, most of the time, the things he says and does are portrayed as humorous. Those things in real life are not funny. Right. In real life, he would be ostracized. I mean, he would be completely socially isolated because the things that he says and does are not funny in real life. So I think a lot of games and TV shows and movies for kids who struggle with social, it's actually very confusing.
Right.
And I have kids who I'll realize that they're copying something that they saw in media, but without realizing the actual social repercussions of that thing. And so I find that I feel like I actually do a lot of unteaching with my students.
Yeah, I get that.
It's a lot of undoing because they're seeing, or even what we refer to sometimes as neurotypical kids. Neurotypical kids typically understand things like, if you're going to curse, you don't do it in front of an adult, right? Mm-hmm. My kids don't always understand that. Right. And so a lot of times my kids are copying things that they see other kids do, but the other kids know the nuance.
Right. They don't have the context the same. Yes. Yeah. That's interesting. I've seen that too.
Yeah. And then the third type of kiddo that that's in my program are kids who almost try too hard and other kids find them annoying. Other kids find them too much. These are very commonly kiddos who are diagnosed with ADHD. And so they have a lot of physical and mental energy. They have really great personalities. They're very creative, but they come across as too much. Right. They tend to maybe perseverate on certain kids, and so they don't always have multiple kids that they can hang out with. They kind of maybe fixate on one kid. They maybe take things too far. So that's the third type of kid that I have in my program. And it's, everybody can it's the kid that you're like, just stop, just sit down, just, stop interrupting, stop talking over people, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
It's definitely common in kids who have that diagnosis that it's hard for them to regulate. And so sometimes they don't know where and when to stop. And they actually end up really sabotaging their social interactions with other kids, which also can lead to social anxiety because they're sabotaging their relationships with other kids. So some of it's kind of cyclical, but those are the three different types of kids that I see in my program. And there can be some crossover, right? You can have a mix, but there's usually one of those that's more predominant than the other ones. And for the kiddos who struggle with regulation, they need social feedback from people. And I find that almost nobody gives other people helpful social feedback. We tend to either avoid, like, oh, that was weird, I'm just not going to talk to that person again. or
Right.
we tend to give negative social feedback.
Right. Right.
Like, you're being really annoying right now.
Right. Right.
And so I get that from my kids a lot. They'll say, Steph, the other kids say I'm annoying, but I don't know why.
Right.
So in my program, I teach all my kids to give each other helpful social feedback so that we can actually start to recognize what's getting in our way when it comes to making friends. But we do it in a helpful way so that nobody's feelings are getting hurt, nobody's being rude or disrespectful, but we're all helping each other
Right.
become more socially successful. And I think that's a huge thing. I think a lot of people think that giving kids social feedback is mean or is rude. But if we're not getting social feedback, we're going to keep doing the things that we're doing because
Right.
we don't know any differently.
Well,
So
the
I,
kids that are coming to the program, though, are all signing up for, I want to learn. I want to be the best person I can be. I want more friends. I want something different for myself. And so when they're in that support group of peers that are all willing to, grow, okay, then it feels more supportive. But I do see, like, in, let's say, a camp cabin, where you have that one kid who's just really can be super annoying. And I do agree, they're getting that negative feedback. Stop, stop. It's a lot of stop, right? You're annoying me, stop. As opposed to, when you do this is how it makes me feel. And
yes,
all, and getting the feedback that way. But then you're training 8 kids in a cabin, to be very different about it. Um,
yes.
so I definitely see the support group being such a great way to learn and a safe space to learn. And yeah, so I really appreciate what you're doing in that regard, is really helpful.
And even in a camp that's for, for anybody and
Right,
everybody, like you said, there are kids of all three of those personality types even in a traditional camp.
right,
And it's still the same outcome. It's still, you've got kids who just don't really know how to socially integrate. You've got kids who are anxious and uncomfortable socially integrating, and you've got kids who are, just like you said, like a little much, and they end up getting kind of ostracized and isolated. So it's the same personality types are out there everywhere. They just tend to be maybe a little more pronounced with the students that I work with. But yeah, I mean, all kids benefit from getting explicit instruction in the things that they just don't know or don't understand, from being, pushed a little bit outside of their comfort zone for the things that they're anxious about, and from getting helpful social feedback from people. Because we all, one of the things I teach the kids is everybody in the world is annoying to somebody. We all annoy somebody because we're all so different, right? But if people would give us helpful social feedback, we could maybe, if we chose to change some of the things we were saying or doing, we can only do that when we are aware of them.
right.
So often, like you said, it's the stop it, I don't want to play with you, leave me alone, you're being
Right.
annoying. None of that helps our kids make different choices.
What about, like, reading the social cues? Like, I'm sure you focus that on that. It seems like, the unspoken and a little harder for kids to figure out. And I'm just curious, like, how that works into your groups and practice.
So my personal opinion is, I don't feel like my students have a harder time picking up on the nonverbal, the unspoken. That's kind of one of the typical perceptions. I actually don't see that. What I see is that my kids recognize when somebody's not interested, doesn't like them, whatever the case may be, but they don't know what else to do. So
Uh-huh.
it's like, I call it taking a detour. They were on this one track. They recognize something's not working out, but they don't know how to jump to a different track.
Right.
And so a great example, I work with a student one-on-one he's in college, he's living independently, he's in college. And we had this conversation. He said, "Oh, I totally recognize when I've been talking for too long and people are no longer interested. I absolutely recognize that." He said, "I just don't know how to save the conversation when that happens."
Got it.
And so it's interesting to me because I find that over and over. My students do recognize when somebody's not interested, when somebody doesn't want to be around. I mean, all these things that we think they miss. What I find is they just don't know what to do about it. They don't know what to do instead.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. And I love that you work with college students too. It just each stage of a child's life, we focus first. I have a daughter who is ADHD, so I've lived with her for 29 years. And, when she was growing up, it was like fifth grade was a really pivotal year for her. And then, going to college was just like a whole other experience. And, each phase of her life, and now she's, 29, and she's just a whole different, person, and I think a lot of the things she has learned over time that support her now as an adult. But it's interesting to hear, like the college point, because that is a big transition and all of these other things, come into play. So I think that's great that you're working with all those age groups.
And it's all the same. I mean, the things that he and I talk about are the same things I would talk about with a 7-year-old.
Really?
And I have a student who was in my program. He's middle school. His grandfather is autistic. And so he and his grandfather would talk about the things that I was teaching him in class, because it doesn't matter how old you are. It's all the same stuff. It's
Very cool.
all the same. The examples and the way that we practice and role play may look different, but the concepts are all the same.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we've been in this conversation. I think there is a ton to learn. And as a camp director, I'm just sitting here and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's just so many better ways that I can support my kids. And I do try to support them the best way that I can. And I know camps, this is what they do in a traditional camp, where kids are not all, sort of coming from like a support group point of view, even though there are camps that are specialized, camps, which is great, because then the kids can learn over the summer and then come back and apply, which I've visited a number of camps like that. We've actually interviewed them on our other show, My Camp podcast, where we talk to specific camps. But just in general, like to be able to be more aware and what are the things we can do to support, and all the resources that you have available. It hasn't seemed that I don't want to say easy, because it's not that easy, but you just made it feel more accessible, like how to support them. It just feels like, to me, it's like, okay, there's these different, the social anxiety looks like this, and this looks like this, and this looks like that. And, and this is going to better support this kind of kid. So I think we should put together a support group for camp directors. Okay. So you can train us. Yeah, and you being a camp director too, or maybe a broadcast on one of, we have some camp director groups that we are also supporting. I would love to do that, because there's so much to learn here, and you make it so simple in like how you break it down. And the more we as adults can support the kids, and I think, for you to, spread your work, which is why you're on the podcast, you do actually offer, Steph, that you will train people to run their own social clubs. So, you're looking to bring this all out into the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea of supporting other camp directors. I think, one of the classic situations that popped into my brain as you were talking is, I think we're all familiar with the kiddo who gravitates toward adults. and can
Yes.
have great conversations with the adults. And we tend to allow that because this is a cool kid, right? We really like this kid. And so anytime there's social opportunities, we're having conversations with this kid, right? That's social anxiety. That is a kiddo who does not have the skills to engage with his or her peers. And so they gravitate toward adults. But there's so many things that we do that feed into the situation. And so that's a perfect example. I have to even be careful with that because it's like I love hanging out with my students. But I also have to recognize when they are gravitating toward
Yes.
adults because they're gravitating away from other kids, right?
Yes.
And so it's even little things like that. We all are familiar with a kiddo like that. But when we allow that, we're actually stifling their ability to be social with their peers.
Right.
And most people would never, see it like that. Most people would not think of it like that. But we've got to shift back towards supporting that kiddo in
Right.
having social interactions with their peers. So it was just something that popped into my head as you were
Yeah.
talking, that like I said, all these kiddos exist in,
Yeah.
these personality types are in every kiddo. They just
Absolutely.
sometimes are more pronounced in the students that I work with. But
Yeah, it also made me think, I don't know where this comes into play. And I guess it's sort of more of the socially a little bit more of an annoying kind of thing, but we do see a lot of kids that ask like a lot of questions. And so you get them in camp and they want to know everything. And that is going to the adults and saying, okay, and like, what's for lunch today? And they, and they'll ask a number of times and they'll want to know when they're going swimming, even though the schedule's there. And, so they're constantly asking those questions. And I think, some camp counselors, they're college students and they're not, as trained in this. And so again, they kind of write it off as being annoying and push the child away, as opposed to saying, here, this is what's going on. And, this is the best thing I can do to support them, and have some resources, tips, skills to do that. Because like I said, in a bunk of 10 kids, you're going to see a whole mix of this,
yeah. And that's anxiety.
Yeah.
A lot of things that we would peg as annoying is the most popular word in my program, because that's just where we go, right? When somebody does anything too much, it becomes annoying.
Right.
And so asking questions, right? That's a huge symptom of anxiety. And so for our kids who are anxious, it's the balance of pushing them a little bit outside of their comfort zone, but also supporting them. So
Right.
for example, if I have kids who ask a lot of questions like that, I will answer with, well, you tell me. You tell me. Right. And so I put it back. If I know that they know the answer, right, I'll put it back on them. You tell me, what time is lunch today? Or what are we at? You tell me. And that gets them to recognize that they have the answer. They know the answer. They don't need the answer from an external source. But also, I am a big believer in teaching kids how to be cognitively flexible. And so sometimes I don't know the answer. Sometimes I don't know what we're doing next. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I pretend like I don't know. Sometimes I truly don't know. And so that's the other part of it, is sometimes the answer is, I don't know. We'll have to see when that time gets here. I don't know. And so it's a combination of pushing a little bit, but also being there to support, right? Being there to, and even if we talk about helping kids in social situations, the kiddo who always talks to adults, kind of cutting that off a little bit, but also supporting them when they're in a situation with other kids. So it's not just that you need to go talk to the kids.
Right. You need to support them in the new behaviors that you're trying to encourage, and have the skills, to do that, which is
right. We want to push our anxious kids, but not so much that we lose them, right? Not so much that they fall apart. So it's and every kid's balance is different. It's knowing each kiddo and where that balance is for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in a camp setting for an overnight camp, the kids are separated from the parents. They're somewhere new. The challenges are a lot, and then you've got them who, missing home and all the anxiety that's coming along with that. And I do feel like that anchor and connecting with the kids is super important. And then there's that like scale that tips, like you're saying,
Right.
And then how do you take them and get them back to more of a balanced way of being. Well, I have to tell you, I think this has just been amazing, this podcast. I've learned so much. And I think there's a lot that we could be doing together to support not just like these kids during the academic year, but really for the summer. And I'm just really interested in talking to you more about that. So we're going to,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm really excited. And I always judge things by like, what do I learn? What have I learned in this? And, I feel like I'm walking away with just a whole new perspective of how I could possibly support all of these kids better. And, as adults, kids need us more. I say they need us now, they need us more than ever, so I appreciate you being here today, Steph, and hopefully you'll come back and, we'll put together some great resources for our kids during the summer together, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love it.
So let's tell our audience again how to find you, and all the different opportunities to work with you and Starfish Social Club.
Yeah, absolutely. Starfish Social Club has undergone a bit of a transition lately. We were an in-person service in San Antonio, Texas for 7 years, and I just moved away. So starfishsocialclub.org is the website. I now have social groups on Zoom in the evenings throughout the school year, so open to anybody that's in the North American time zones. And then for summer camp this year, I definitely will be back in San Antonio, Texas, since that's where the base is. But I'm also considering seeing if we have interest in running summer camps in other locations in the US this summer. Because now that we're on Zoom, we have kids in 3 different time zones across the US. Yeah. So as I said earlier, sometimes I don't know what's happening next. And this summer is a great example. I do know that we'll have our in-person camp in San Antonio, and then I would love to be able to have it in other places as well. So summer camp is definitely one of my favorite things that I do in my program. It's just a different, it's a break from the school year. It's just a different experience.
Yeah. And it just provides lots of great opportunities. I always tell kids to practice so that they can go back to school and have a different experience, but they've used that time during the summer to, try new things. And that's the great opportunity, is that break. And, truthfully, you can do that. We're summer camp year round, 365 days of summer camp at Happy Camper Live. So every weekend is an opportunity. Every, time off from school is an opportunity. Your winter break is an opportunity to be able to try those new things and then get back and, be even more successful in the school year for your kids. So thank you for being here. This is Allison Miller, founder of Happy Camper Live, and we just love our Raising a Happy Camper podcast and having great guests like Steph West. So thank you again for being here today, and I'm looking forward to talking again soon.
Thanks, Allison.
Take a moment to shine.